everyone. We are Group 3 and we will be discussing about Chicana activists of the Mexican Revolution. Some of the topics we will discuss are Chicana feminists, the Primer Congreso Feminista Yucatán, power and resistance, Chicana in labor strikes and workforce, evolution of women's rights, and union efforts.
So to start, Josefa Ortiz de Dominguez is an activist, or rather was an activist, born September 8, 1768. She was born in what is now Morelia, and she grew up with her sister, who was a great supporter of hers and pushed her to attend a prestigious college. And there she eventually met Miguel Dominguez, who used to visit the school. They ended up wedding in secret, and her husband ultimately worked in the royal court as a civil officer. And so because of this, Josefa was very privy to current affairs and oppression going on around her. And so she was specifically against the abuse from the Spaniards, specifically European-born Spaniards, against Native people. And so she used her platform as chief magistrate to fight for indigenous rights and was also active in many charities and things along the way. So next, the Querétaro conspiracy. So Josefa was a key player and a leader in a lot of radical political groups. She actually held secret meetings with her fellow activists in her own home. And she was a part of the Querétaro conspiracy, which was an underground movement, and they were seeking to take down oppressive Spanish rule. And on September 13th, 1810, it was discovered that supporters of the revolution were hoarding weapons. And so she decided to put together a message made of newspaper clippings and give it to the mayor, who went on to give it to Father Miguel Hidalgo. And it was a message of warning. And upon receiving the note, Miguel decided to move the date of the uprising to September 16th. And thanks to this timely alert, many of her co-conspirators escaped arrest. Unfortunately, though, she was convicted for treason that day and became free in 1817, mostly thanks to her husband. So post-independence, what did her life look like? So after the War of Independence in 1822, Josefa was offered many rewards and roles that were prestigious, but she mostly refused them all. For example, she was offered the role of lady-in-waiting from the Mexican emperor at the time, but she refused the honor. In 1823, the empress made her a woman of honor, but she also didn't really have an interest in that. She continued to collaborate, though, in a number of radical political groups, and the reason why she refused all of these honors is because she simply felt that it was her duty to stand up for the people with no voice, because she felt that she was a patriot. And she died in 1829. In 1910, though, she was the first woman depicted on the Mexican stamp, and her profile appeared on the 5 centavos from 1942 to 1978. And fun fact, she was actually the second woman ever depicted on Spain's stamp as well. Empowered resistance. So Josefa Ortiz de Dominguez was an activist that represented, at least to me, both power and resistance working together. So power, on one hand, because she used her status in government and also her husband's status to push for disenfranchised people's rights. And she was a leader and collaborator in these political groups, bringing people together who had similar goals as her. And this was a clear example of power at play, but I think the key here is that it's an example of someone utilizing power for good rather than evil, which is not always common. And next, resistance. I think Josefa also was incredibly resistant to oppression, and she pushed against ideas that didn't sit right to her. She was even willing to risk her own safety for the issues that she was passionate about. namely, like I said, Indigenous people's rights more than anything. And I think this is because she viewed the independence of other people, especially people who were made to feel inferior. I feel that she felt that was a necessity and way more important than putting herself first. And so she continued to participate in radical political activism until she passed. And I think this is also just a key indicator that this was her life's work.
Emma Tenayuca is a Mexican-American civil rights activist and labor organizer. She got a sense of Mexican identity and concern of social injustice from her grandfather. On Sundays, they would attend the Plaza del Zacate in San Antonio's Milan Park, where they would listen to labor rights, politics, and religion. In 1933, she joined the strike of women at the H.W. Fink's Cigar Company, where she experienced police beating striking workers before being arrested herself. During the Great Depression, her goal of activism developed from observing starvation amongst her community. After high school, she joined other female activists in the union named International Ladies Garment Workers Union, where she believed they neglected marginalized people in her Tejano community. Later, she affiliated herself with the Communist Party. In 1938, she led the huge strike by Peek and Shellers in San Antonio, where she encouraged Peek and Sheller employees to walk out of their jobs at the Delicious Pekin Company in protest for better working conditions and wages. Later, she left the Communist Party in 1946 and became a teacher in California. The Pekin Sheller strike initiated on January 31st, 1938, when 12,000 Pekin Shellers, mostly Hispanic women, walked out of their job to protest for better wages and working conditions. The strike lasted 3 months and caused several confrontations between the Pekin Company Sheller workers and local government. The salary of the Pekin Sheller worker worked more than 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, for $2 to $3 weekly. As a result of poor working conditions, employees were exposed to tuberculosis. Emma Tenayuki took initiative of the issue by leading a peaceful strike. However, the local government, along with shelling companies, sent out police to arrest and attack strikers. After 37 days of the strike, both sides came to agreement to arbitrations, where the three-person board ruled in favor of the strikes, which ordered higher wages. On October 24, 1938, the Fair Labor Relations Act passed, which established a new minimum wage of 25 cents per hour. As a result of the act, the Southern Pekin Shelling Companies laid off 10,000 Pekin shellers, didn't avail to the minimum wage, and chose mechanization over Pekin employees. Dolores Huerta is one of the most influential labor activists and leader of the Chicano civil rights movement. She was the founder of the Agricultural Workers Association along with Cesar Chavez. Huerta helped organize the 1965 Delano strike of 5,000 grape workers and played as the negotiator in the workers' contract. Huerta was one of the driving forces of the grape boycott in the late 1960s that led to a successful union contract by 1970s. In 1973, Huerta led a peaceful protest on the consumer boycott of grapes, which affected the California Agricultural Labor Relations of 1975. This act allowed farm workers to form unions and bargain for better wages and conditions. Since Huerta had a union taking the plight of farm workers to consumers, several companies had to reconsider bargaining with the union. As a result, this helped improve the economic condition of farm workers. The evolution of women in the workforce fluctuated in Chicano history from colonial times to the war to Mexican Revolutionary period. During the colonial period, women worked in mines, provided domestic and sexual services. Additionally, women created tallow for candles, worked in the silk industry, harvesting silkworms beneath their breasts, tailing in sugar mills and winery, and worked in essential positions depending on the economy. Upper-class women worked domestically in the household and for companionship. After the conquest, several women faces were deformed due to women trafficking, making branding customary. In the 1500s, Spanish women held a valuable position. Criollas, along with mestizas, were in the middle, and the lowest social position were Indian women. Women held submissive roles as daughter and wives because the colonial period was conducive to increase the status of women. Women during the Mexican-American War were forced into arranged intermarriage in order for Anglo men to obtain Mexican land by becoming Mexican citizens. By the wartime, women were raped or violated. Women were perceived and treated as the winnings of the conquest because through arranged intermarriage, it allowed rich Mexicans to maintain their landholdings according to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. During the Mexican Revolution, women served as role models for Chicanas because Las Adelitas traveled with soldiers in an attempt to win back the land for the peasants. Many women carried guns, fought in battlefields, and rose to high military ranks. Women multitasked, caring for others, cooking, tending the ill and wounded, and succeeded in keeping the population alive. Additionally, women suffered hardships of the war by giving birth, then resting 2 hours, then catching up with the forces to move forward. Many women were assisted by other women in the healing traditions inherited from Spanish, European, and native Indian ancestors. In essence, women had to adopt to different traditions for survival and liberation.